This year on the budget, we have close to 300 million rand. And we're hoping in the next 5 years to spend just over 1.3 billion rand towards that investment. So far, we've rolled out around 550 kilometers of broadband. And our approach as the city is very different to other big metros in South Africa. And initially, when we started the project, we were not received that warmly, and people questioned the City of Cape Town's approach. We've decided to go for an open access system in that the city invests and builds the infrastructure, and then we open up our broadband network to the private sector. They then make use of our external or additional capacity, and we lease this to them at a very affordable tariff, which we advertise publicly. This is different to other municipalities because, and maybe I should just make an example of Durban and Johannesburg, maybe, because they're the biggest, or the other biggest metros in South Africa. They have opted for a different model in that they've appointed private companies to build the infrastructure, and the private company would then have complete rights over that infrastructure and would then regulate the usage of the network. We believe that this would not suit our purposes, purely because, A, we wanted to ensure that we create access where there previously wasn't access. What we've seen with regards to telecommunication companies is that there is generally telecommunications infrastructure in what you would deem your wealthier areas.
Yeah.
So in your previously disadvantaged areas, there's very minimal or limited infrastructure. And so we're rolling out fiber in areas like Mitchell's Plain and Khayelitsha. And in that way, we allow the private sector to get into a market which never existed before. And in that way, we break up the monopolies.
Yes.
And slowly reduce the cost of telecommunications. Just about 2 or 3 months ago, we seen that Johannesburg decided to change their approach to that of Cape Town. And they've done that, unfortunately, at a very large cost to the organization. They've now terminated their contract with Ericsson for 1 billion rand.
Wow.
And they have opted to invest and build the infrastructure and regulate the access to that.
Okay. So from the perspective of, I know that when I saw you probably about 18 months ago, you were very involved in attracting call centers to Cape Town.
Yes.
And you were very successful with that. Do you want to share some of those successes with us, of the call centers you've been able to develop in the City of Cape Town?
Well, corporate services is also responsible for customer relations, which houses our corporate contact center. And so we're interested in the call center industry purely because it is a business which we are also partly involved in. I must add that through our broadband interventions, we've been able to reduce the internal telecommunications costs to about 25 million per annum. And so this has really impacted our call center operations quite significantly. We've been able to become far more efficient in dealing with calls, and in that way ensure that we save our residents money. We've tried to build a relationship with the private sector who are in the sector of business processing. That is the other terminology, I think, for that particular industry. Purely because we understand that Cape Town, in terms of its location and some of its advantages, are optimally suited for that sector, and it could be a real driver for job creation. And so where we can, we've tried to partner with organizations like PEPESA to look at dual training opportunities, both for their agents as well as ours. We've tried to understand some of their challenges in the broader national economy around things like taxes and BE and a range of other regulations that potentially hinder their business. And so in that way, yes, we're forging a closer relationship, but also in a way that is mutually beneficial.
Fabulous. A little bit earlier, before we started the formal conversation, you were talking about how there'd been quite a lot of lessons learned in terms of the rollout in Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain. So I was just wondering if you could share that with us of what has been learned so far, so that there's continuous improvement built into the rollout and into the project. As you say, to save the taxpayers some money, the ratepayers some money.
Well, I think I must add that the broadband, as I mentioned in the beginning, that's the most significant project that we're driving. And everything else is really us leveraging upon that. So one example is with our Wi-Fi rollout, also termed our Digital Inclusive Project, which is about creating Wi-Fi access zones in communities across Cape Town. We started off that project through running a pilot, which the United States Development Agency funded. That ran just over a year, and we ran that in Mitchell's Plain in Khayelitsha, purely to understand what challenges may arise in so-called semi and informal areas when further rolling out the project. We did discover, particularly in Khayelitsha, that we had difficulty providing Wi-Fi to the home because the Wi-Fi, should I say, the bandwidth or the connectivity was difficult in transcending through congregated iron. And so we had to tweak the project, and really our approach now is about connecting communities and creating vibrant, open public spaces by providing Wi-Fi outside of our public areas where people congregate for services, such as outside of our libraries or clinics or My City bus stations, or outside of our public administration offices. And in that way, we've leveraged opportunities not only for ourselves, but for the local community. So someone who now lives in Khayelitsha can go to their local library, or while they are picking up their medication at their clinic, they can access free Wi-Fi and sort of advertise their local business on Gumtree at no cost to them. What has been key in the success of our Wi-Fi rollout are our private sector partners. We've partnered initially with 3 companies, MWeb, Internet Solutions, and Orange. Internet Solutions just recently bought over MWeb, and so we have 2 partners, Orange and MWeb. Orange provides 3 gigabytes per day. Internet Solution provides, I think, around 250. So it's quite significant amounts of data that one can receive for free. And it's been unbelievable to see the uptake. We, as the city, haven't ever advertised free Wi-Fi, that it's available. But in Khayelitsha alone, in the month of January, I recall the month of January, there were over 16,000 users just in one Wi-Fi access point, utilizing free internet for a range of things, to do research, to load videos and a range of other things, which I think is amazing. And that's now a market that's been created. So your Internet Solutions and Orange wouldn't have ever been able to access that market. And so that's the power of, I think, the concept of digital inclusivity. And we're excited to be pioneering it.
Very much so. And because there always is a very strong correlation between the percentage of the population who have access to internet and the economic activity of that community, that metro, or maybe even that country. So there's that very strong correlation. Also, the thing is that it's very nice to see an example of, let's build it, the people will come, and the people will use it. Let's give access, create the channel, and we will see the value from it, which I think is very much an American model. I remember a number of years ago, there was the first investment that was made into Google was before they were really clear about how they were going to make money. But what it is, they just had a lot of users, and the same with Facebook. Have a lot of people who are using Facebook, not really sure how we're going to make money out of it yet, but actually get the investment. So that is really also very refreshing to see, is that now internet-based businesses have suddenly got this channel to operate from, whereas they didn't have that before. They didn't have that access before. How has this linked onto your Smart Cape initiative with the 102 libraries? Is it going to supersede that, or have you been able to take a lot of the people who were using the internet terminals in the library and kind of expand that footprint? How is that linked up with that program?
I think first and foremost, there probably isn't that internet is the great equalizer.
Yes.
And that is, I think, key in the context of South Africa, where we see these large disparities between different groupings of people. And the Digital Inclusive Project, which is really born out of the broadband optic resource, has been driven largely by the mayor, and she set a very powerful vision and objective for the city. And that vision and objective really is that she wants to see Cape Town as the first digital inclusive city in Africa. And so that might pose, a massive challenge, but I think we've committed ourselves to that vision, and it speaks to many of the objectives within the National Development Plan as well. The Wi-Fi rollout does not supersede the Smart Cape at all. It's really an expansion. So across 102 of our libraries, we have Smart Cape facility, which is really a corner within a library where there's computers and you can access the internet on the computers. But actually it's also providing internet throughout the entire library. So if you have a cell phone or laptop, you could sit anywhere in the library and access the internet. The Wi-Fi rollout is expanding on that, in that we are taking that access outside of the four walls of our libraries, and trying to connect communities by making our public spaces far more inclusive. So I think that's been really positive to see, because I think the space of libraries are becoming less and less significant as the world becomes more digitized. We don't really buy newspapers anymore, and hardly ever buy actual books. Everything you read via your cell phone, and in this way we ensure that the library and our open spaces remain an integral part of our communities. So I think that is key to the success of that particular project.
Excellent. We have some questions. Gordon, if you want to introduce yourself, let's just get a microphone to you quickly. Carla, thank you. That would be great. There we go. Thanks, AB.
Good evening, Councillor. Gordon Chunnett. You speak about the Wi-Fi rollout, but it's really the optical fibre network, the backbone, that presents all sorts of opportunities, not the least of which is on security and the placement of cameras to monitor not only vehicles entering and leaving certain areas and their passage through the city in terms of tracking them from a crime prevention point of view. But there's a huge rollout there in terms of security aspects. Would you care to comment on that?
Yes. So I think maybe that's one aspect that I did not touch on, in that the optic fiber rollout is not only about digitizing our residents and opening a world of learning to them, but it's really about upgrading our internal systems. And so with our optic rollout, we've also built and are in the process of building 12 world-class switching centers. And those data centers are then connected to our information centers. Our key information center is based in Gudud, which is a multi-purpose information center where transport, law enforcement, Metro Police, and a range of other services sits and monitors cameras across the city. And so the fact that we are broadening our telecommunications footprint allows us to ensure that we can install CCTV cameras in previously disadvantaged communities where there wasn't previously infrastructure. And in that way, we ensure that security is not only for an elite few, but it becomes the core of every single community. And so we've, in our draft budget, which we're going to approve, which Council's going to approve at the end of this month, through the optic fiber rollout, we've been able to install CCTV cameras in areas like Philippi, etc., where now there is that sort of coverage and that security and safeguard for the lives of community members, which I think adds great value to any individual. So yes, as I mentioned before, the rollout is both about ensuring access for the broader community, breaking up the existing monopolies, but also allowing the city to enhance its internal operations and to do so more effectively.
Yes, and I think also there's a spin-off in terms of job creation, because we were actually chatting about it a little bit earlier today, my colleague AB and I, where he was really he was commenting on the My City Bus system and how efficiently it works and how terrific it is in terms of people they can get to and from their workplace, which means that employers can now run 2 shifts instead of only running 1 shift. If people feel that they're safe when they go home, let's say maybe late at night, maybe they've been doing a second shift or something like that, they're not fearful because they're going home and maybe it's dark now. So all the positive consequences of something like that really has an impact, as you say, on everybody's daily life, and it increases economic opportunities for everybody, so that now communities that are, fairly impoverished can really actually become a lot more active because people are safe, they've got access to markets, because they've got access to internet, they're secure and that sort of thing. So yes, the advantages are, it's a little bit like the ripples in the pond.
Yes.
One only really starts to see the impact after a while, and a lot of it can also be fairly intangible, but it doesn't mean that it's not there.
Yes, exactly. It's definitely opening up a world that is perhaps largely still unknown. And the city is trying to be very innovative in its thinking. Maybe one aspect I should also share that we're going to be testing, I shouldn't actually say this, but I am tempted to. We're in the process of also doing a pilot study to install Wi-Fi on all of our My City buses as an incentive to get people out of their cars and onto the buses, but also to understand the scope of our Wi-Fi project. We're also doing a number of things around spectrum availability, which, when approved, will also allow the City of Cape Town to take our services to the next level.
Do we have another question? Yes, Keith. Yeah, right.
Thanks, AB. Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Councillor. It's actually very interesting. I come from the telecoms industry, so you're talking my language now. I'm very curious about what the city's achieved in terms of broadband penetration against, say, other major cities in the country and potentially even other provinces. The
city has been quite unique in that we've decided to go along a very different path in terms of our broadband approach, in that we have decided to go for an open access system where we invest the infrastructure and then we lease our additional capacity to the private sector at a very minimal cost. And what we've actually seen through our engagements with companies is that slowly but surely the cost of telecommunications is now coming down, and we've heard some of the businesses come to us through our business services unit, which we've just recently set up, to say that they truly believe that the City of Cape Town has a large reason for that, which we think is really fantastic. In terms of our penetration, as I mentioned, we started this project last year. Thus far, we've been able to roll out 550 kilometers of broadband. Our objective for phase 1 is to roll out 1,042 kilometers of broadband. This is by far the most, I think, significant than any other municipality. And we know this because we serve as part of the National Minister's Telecommunications Steering Committee, which meets every quarter. And I was fortunate enough to attend the last meeting where each province was asked to give an update on broadband penetration to date. And in that report back session, it was quite evident that Cape Town was leading. And we were asked by the Minister of Communications to partner with other metros to assist in increasing their rollout capacity, as well as assist them in sharing our learnings around financial modeling. Because not only are we investing quite a lot from the city, but our business model will ensure that we actually pay off that investment within a period of 5 to 7 years through the revenue that we receive by leasing our additional capacity to private sector players. And then in that way, it's a win-win situation, and we can then go back to the residents of Cape Town and say, we've ensured that there's a return on investment, and in that way, you haven't wasted any of your rates money.
The traffic networks be linked in via optical fiber from a point of view of both monitoring and secondly for synchronization of the traffic signals throughout the city?
Yes, it definitely will be. When we initiated the broadband project, our initial focus was purely for our the city's needs. Where we're going to now, which is connecting other buildings, we're in the process of connecting close to 90 provincial buildings. We're expanding on that by partnering with other organizations, and that's the phase 2 that we're busy with. But phase 1 was about looking at our internal needs, reducing our telecommunications costs, streamlining our business processes, and enhancing our communications by connecting our existing processes and programs to our network. The city does have rights to run its own network now. We've recently just obtained that certificate from ICASA, which allows us to connect things like traffic signaling, disaster risk management information, to dispatch relevant teams to any emergencies, etc. So yes, that is our focus, and it has been done, and we will continue to do so as we roll out the project.
Regarding the internet that's been rolled out in Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain, in terms of the computer skills that people in that area might have to utilize those internet access points, do you have any skills development programs in place, or have you planned to partner with places like Silulo or Hubspace or the Barn, who specialize in skills development at all?
Well, perhaps that's a question that we should pose to the economic development officials, but we have agreements in place where we partner with external organizations that specialize in different areas, one of them being IT, and in those instances we support and rely on those organizations to assist in driving much of what you mentioned. But in terms of our libraries, the Smart Cape is really a project that we do in collaboration with Community Services, which is responsible for libraries. And one of the things I'm currently doing is to initiate the concept of not only creating library volunteers, but IT volunteers, which we can pay on a stipend basis perhaps, and then allow those individuals to use their expertise and experience to help young learners who might be unable to access the internet.
And old learners.
And old learners. And what I also do on a month-to-month basis is that I monitor the Smart Cape usage statistics. And where there are low usage statistics, I set up a visit and I go to those libraries to understand why it is. For example, the library in the city centre is over 1 million users, whereas other areas you have not even 1% of that. And when one goes and physically visits those libraries, you can start to understand why it is. And in many instances, I went to a library in Philippi a few months ago, and there were enough computers, and there were librarians, but no one actually understood how to access the computer. And in the corner, I saw one young boy, happily going along on the computer, and he seemed to be the only one knowing how to navigate the internet, and there were 5 other learners watching him. And so instead of having those 5 learners on the other computers, and it's unfortunate to see that they're now having to be guided by that one individual who has the knowledge. So we're trying to introduce the concept of IT volunteers in the library to maximize the usage.
And this is not a loaded question. I'd really like to understand what drove the city to this way of thinking, because obviously it's been hugely successful, and what would be the advice that you'd give to other parts of the country to be able to achieve what the city has in this regard?
I think the thinking was inspired by the World Design Capital 2014, which the city was awarded. That, I think, placed the city in a position where we needed to look internally and understand if we were doing things optimally and innovatively. And through that internal analysis, we could attest to our successes, but also to our failures and areas for improvement. And we needed to also, I think, ensure that as Cape Town, we don't only compare ourselves to Johannesburg or Durban, but that we can slowly put ourselves on par with cities like London and New York. And so the World Design Capital campaign allowed us to drive that quite intensely. We understand that the world is moving to a space where we have become extremely digitized, and so many of the projects that ran under the World Design Capital, open data being one of them, was about ensuring digitization. And through that, we've been able to see many other spin-offs, and we've tried to ensure, particularly at a political level, that world design wasn't a once-off. So we have the award and let's move on now. But to ensure that innovation is a constant aspect of the way we do business as a municipality. And we have an innovation forum, which the objective of the innovation forum is to continue that way of thinking. We're looking at ways to ensure that that innovation forum becomes far more permanent in terms of our structure as an organization. And there are many ideas on the table around how we possibly do that. So that's essentially where the thinking was, I think, born and why it was driven from that particular angle.
And maybe just the message you would give to the other cities and regions. Thanks.
I think the message is definitely the answer lies in partnerships. What the World Design Capital Award taught us is that as a government, we don't have all the answers. And we are extremely bureaucratic, and that's not entirely helpful for economic development and growth. And so as part of that campaign, we opened ourselves to ideas of external experts. And so many of the innovators that drove particular projects came from the private sector. And we gave them the space and to a large extent the resources to pilot innovative thinking. And we then try to implement that in our internal operations. So I would say definitely partnerships. Cities should try to not only learn from other cities, but from the private sector. Our Wi-Fi project attests to the success of the public-private partnership and what one can leverage from that. It's far beyond what we could do on our own. And so I think government at large should understand that it doesn't operate in isolation, but that we're part of a collective, and we need to value what that collective can bring to the fore.
Are there any other questions? Because I have a question. If you wouldn't mind just expanding a little bit on the whole concept, the open data and big data, and how is that starting to come to the fore for the city?
Well, as I mentioned, it was a project that was driven under the World Design banner, and perhaps South Africa was a bit slow in taking on the open data concept. It has been an initiative that many other cities like Helsinki and London and New York have already ventured into. And we actually engaged quite closely with them, and the mayor herself quite intensely at the time discussed alternatives around open data with Mayor Bloomberg at the time. So really, we understood that as a local government, we are the custodians of information and data, and that there lies great value in that data. But we hold on so tightly, and we don't actually make data. And the world is moving into a space in which data equates to currency, and there's so much power behind it. And what we then did was we initiated a process where we first and foremost developed a policy which was really our guideline and framework for venturing into the area of open data. But we constantly ensured that we engage with external players within the sector who were experts within this field to ensure that we didn't, stumble into the same challenges as other cities. So we developed the policy that was approved by council. The policy made provision for a Open Data Steering Committee to be established. And really the Open Data Steering Committee is comprised of internal city officials. I chair that Open Data Steering Committee, but we also have 2 members of the public serving on that Open Data Steering Committee. And they really oversee and play an oversight role in terms of the policy and the portal. The portal was developed internally. We launched it, I think it was the end of January, and it hosts a range of data. The portal is very easy to navigate. There's a tab that indicates request data. So if you don't find what you are looking for, you can request a particular data set, and we'll try and make that available for you as soon as possible. If there is any suggestions that you have, there's a tab for feedback, because we're constantly trying to optimize the usability of the site. We constantly load new data sets onto the site to ensure that it's current and relevant. But beyond that, we learned from cities like Helsinki, who went all out and pushed out all the data they had onto the site. And what they discovered in doing their monitoring and evaluation processes is that very limited amount of that data was actually absorbed or utilized. So what we've tried to do is push out data that the sector finds relevant. And therefore we work on the requested data feedback quite often, and that we ensure that the data that we place on the portal is relevant and will be utilized for any other purposes. The site is so easy to navigate. You don't have to do login or anything like that. We don't track what you do with the data. And in that way, we ensure that when we say free and open, transparent, we really do mean that. The Open Data Steering Committee is also not an hindrance in that it's not the almighty which declines data as they please. We work along the policy, which we will end up reviewing on an annual basis, and we'll also have an annual review of the committee where we'll invite new members of the public to apply to serve on the steering committee, and in that way we ensure we ensure transparency and that there's consistency in terms of new ideas coming into that steering committee. We are the first city to have launched the Open Data Portal site, and we are now partnering with other African cities who would like to learn from Cape Town, and we are engaging with those stakeholders to ensure that the rest of Africa gets onto the open data thinking.
Fabulous. Do we have one last question for the councillor before we close for this evening? Timwin Corsi. Here we go. Maybe you're going to answer the questions from an economic development perspective.
Yeah, thanks. Good evening. Hello, councillor. With regards to the question around skills, digital skills or e-skilling, we take an approach where we coordinate an ecosystem. So we work with a number of partners that have mandates around rolling out e-skilling. For example, the E-Skills Institute and the University of Western Cape. So we participate on those forums and they roll out programs because we don't want to duplicate any other programs. Then also we participate in the Premier's Provincial Skills Program because they also have an element that rolls out and coordinates programs across the city and across the province. Then at the community level, we have a number of programs that are funded by sub-councils that stick to then, as part of an inclusive strategy to equip especially young people and community members to bring them into the digital skills space. Thanks.
Councillor, would you like to give us some
I
closing
think there was one more
remarks?
question.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry, Keith, I don't mean to gag you.
I'm just curious about, so the moment you start giving people data, or not data, access to internet and to data, and I'll use my family as an example. So we started off as a 1 gig internet family, and my kids are now teenagers, and we upgraded our service probably about 6 months ago. And over the last few months, we're probably approaching 100 gigs a month as a household, because we have devices in the house. How's the city going to cope with that demand? So you're providing free access, potentially at some point it's paid. How do you see that growing, and how do you see the city and the partners managing that and ensuring that the costs are low enough that people continue to use the services?
Well, thank you for asking, I think, the real and the hard question. We say free, but nothing's for free. So the question is who's paying for it? In the respect to our Wi-Fi project, the real cost bearers are the private sector who we've partnered with. So your Orange and Internet Solutions. And they, as I said, provide a certain capacity for free to the user. Once you've exhausted your capacity, a little message will pop up which will give you the option of purchasing additional data, and that's really how they make their money. And so our role really as the city is about providing that infrastructure, allowing new partners to enter the market, and then providing that initial access. Beyond that, it then becomes a relationship between the supplier and the consumer. And what we have seen through our engagements with Internet Solutions and Orange is that they actually are making a significant amount of business, because people become, so accustomed to now daily logging onto either Orange or Internet Solutions. You slowly build up a relationship of loyalty, and in that way you realize you actually need the data, and so you start buying once off, and on a daily basis, once you've consumed your capacity, you then end up buying more, and that is a organic, I think, business relationship, which is regulated by the market economy. And we don't want to interfere in that space too much. But I think what we have indicated from the start is that our free is up until a certain capacity. And even in our Smart Cape facilities in our libraries, we only offer 250 megs per day. And so that is made clear, and so that there's no confusion or false assumptions around a complete free for all. And that's a messaging that's not always popular to deliver, but it is important because we can only do so much. In addition to that, the Wi-Fi access points obviously also poses some, should I say, limits in that it can only be accessed in a particular radius, generally between 10 to 5 meters, and that's an additional, I think, perhaps burden to the average user, but these are things that we also openly communicate. And so we've tried to ensure that we communicate to our users and our residents that, yes, we're offering this service for free, but it's free up until a certain point, and then we allow you to engage as an ordinary consumer in what is now quite an important commodity in your ordinary day-to-day lives, as you make mention of your family and how that the need for that particular commodity has increased. And so we try to, as I say, just make people aware of that.
Managing expectations.
Yes.
Yes.
I have a question related to telecommunications and cell phone towers. A very emotive subject in Cape Town because nobody wants to have a cell phone tower in proximity of where they live. Johannesburg and the N1 between Johannesburg and Pretoria, they've taken the step of making every single light pole along that route a cell phone repeating tower, for want of a better word, but at extremely low intensity, significantly less than what one has with major cell phone towers. I'm not sure that this is entirely within your ambit, but it's certainly a point that the city should take on board, because we have very poor signal coverage across certain parts of the city, and with the optical fiber rollout, light poles, street lighting could be used to augment the cell phone distribution network on an open access network basis, whereby you have one installation that covers a multitude of different operators. And I do believe that the city could take a leaf out of another book there.
I definitely agree with you. That's a brilliant idea, and both IT and the Directorate of Utilities have been engaging with other companies who are pioneering that kind of technology. I must say that Cape Townians are quite vocal with regards to ensuring that Cape Town remains a particular way. we do have a cell phone mast policy that guides both the application process for telecommunications companies to apply to install cell phone masts across the city. But the policy also provides a framework in which we decide whether we approve or decline applications. And I think some residents are open to the idea because there's potentially a financial incentive for them if it's located in their backyard, and I've seen a few of those, and they're not pretty things to look at. What we've tried to ensure is that in installing these cell phone masts, that the private sector look at more aesthetically pleasing mechanisms to install these cell phone masts. But I must share with you, I think we could make use of some of our infrastructure and really use it for a range of purposes, including cell phone connectivity. The signal in Cape Town is not great at all, and even non-existent in other areas. So as residents, we can't push back entirely because we do need the utilities directorate particularly has been engaging with some private sector players in that respect.
Terrific. Xanthia, Councillor, thank you very, very much for joining us
you.
this evening. It's been really an eye-opener in terms of what the city is doing and leading the charge on the continent. So, yes, thanks once again. And we're looking forward to more updates from you on these very exciting projects.
Thank you once again for the third Thursday. I enjoyed it. It was lots of fun. And I look forward to many others.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Well, I think what we can do is we can ask the rest of the questions over some nice refreshments and a fabulous spread that Carla and her team have put on for us. So, Carla, thank you very much. Her train from the kitchen is extending this far. Yes, thank you very much. That was really terrific.